The New York Rangers were definitely pretty disappointing overall this past regular season, and there were many reasons why I guess you could say the Rangers ultimately did not make playoffs. But one big major reason, which was pretty evident, was the overall team's just poor play defensively. It wasn't just the defensemen, it was also the forwards as well. The overall team in general was just not good enough defensively. You can blame that on the coaching staff, the defensemen, the forwards. You can kind of pass that blame around. But I think the Rangers have done a pretty good job since last regular season up until now with the moves they've also made so far this offseason on trying to really upgrade and change this New York Rangers defense core. And with also adding in a new head coach and a new bunch of assistants and new defensive system, I really do think this team could possibly get right back on track to being one of the better teams in the entire NHL and could really have a much improved defense core heading into this upcoming season as well. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at all the kind of changes we have seen to this New York Rangers defense core since the beginning of last regular season, and we're just going to kind of talk about the changes, take a look at some of the defense pairings we could possibly see, take a look at daily faceoffs defense pairings, some of the extra defensemen that are going to be used as kind of depth players, possible call-ups, and just really take an overall kind of view and in-depth kind of look here at the New York Rangers defense core and that whole kind of situation heading into the 2025-26 NHL regular season. So let's get right into it here, and we'll start off with the kind of moves that have happened so far this offseason there, and the kind of big ones, which of course has been the New York Rangers signing and trading away K'Andre Miller over to the Carolina Hurricanes, where the Rangers signed him to a pretty massive deal where he gets a $7.5 million cap hit on a long-term deal, and the Rangers got back a first and second round pick, which in itself I think is pretty great value, especially when you consider it is in a loaded 2026 NHL draft class. But also they got back a higher tier prospect in Scott Morrow, who is a defenseman, a right-handed shot guy, standing at about 6'2", who is a bit more of an offensive player, but kind of solid two-way guy, but definitely a little more offensive than defensive, but still a solid kind of higher-end defense prospect who's still only 22 years old, who stands at 6'2", who's a right-handed shot defenseman. So a first, second round pick and a high-tier prospect for someone who the team was actively trying to get rid of, I think was pretty incredible. So I think that in itself was a kind of nice move and definitely kind of helped the team overall defensively, because they not only cleared up a good amount of cap space, but also got back a player in Scott Morrow who can definitely make an impact at the NHL level at some point throughout this upcoming season, and very well could end up being on the opening night lineup for the Rangers as well, as he does have some NHL experience already in the playoffs and in the regular season for the Canes, and also had a really great season in the AHL with their organization as well this past season. So I think that in itself was a good trade, but with that kind of move happening there, that allowed this team to go out there and sign the big defenseman in free agency, and that was, of course, Vladislav Gavrikov. This was a player that was kind of needed to be brought in. The Rangers had to go out there and add in a true top 4 caliber defenseman, and they did that by getting a top pairing caliber guy in Vladislav Gavrikov, one of the kind of, better defensive defensemen in the entire NHL. Like, if you're talking about among kind of defensive defensemen, truly, he's top 10, top 15 at least there. So I think this is an incredible defenseman there the Rangers picked up here, and this could really be a kind of game-changing player for this Rangers team overall, not just defensively, but really could be a just major impactful piece. He's got a lot of playoff experience, of course, solid veteran player, but I think this contract should age pretty well there. He's not terribly old. A $7 million cap hit for a top pairing caliber guy, a number 2 caliber defenseman, I think is pretty great. And he's also, of course, going to be the best defense partner we have pretty much seen for Adam Fox ever. So I think that's not only good for Gavrikov, he's going to come here and be alongside a great defenseman, but it's also going to be great for Foxy, because he's going to get to have a pretty much kind of perfect partner for him, because Gavrikov is, of course, that more kind of defensive defenseman kind of shutdown guy, where now maybe someone like a Fox can have a little more kind of run offensively, as he can probably have a little more trust in a guy like Gavrikov to kind of shut things down defensively over someone like, Ryan Lindgren, for example, who was previously his kind of long-term defense partner. But let's carry on now and kind of talk about 2 other defensemen that I think could end up having a pretty key role for this Rangers team, and that is Carson Soucy and Will Borgen. And I know a guy like Carson Soucy, especially didn't have a great, past regular season here with the Rangers, but I think when you kind of consider he did get traded midseason there, the Rangers overall as a team defensively were pretty horrendous. There were many, many players that were having some pretty bad seasons and some pretty big drop-offs from the previous 2023-24 season. So just in general, the team was kind of in a complete disaster this past season. So a guy like Soucy's coming in mid-season there, I don't put all the kind of blame on him there and think he's kind of a complete lost cause there at this point. So, yes, was the trade kind of good? Not really, of course, but I do think Soucy is someone who, with a full offseason with the team now, having a whole new kind of coaching staff, a new defensive system coming in as well with Mike Sullivan and his kind of crew there, and also, having a couple new players come in, I think this team overall should be much more improved, especially defensively, and I think someone like Soucy there, with all that kind of being said, the new coaching staff, a new system, a full offseason now with this team, hopefully he can kind of get back on track to where he's been in the past, where he's capable of being a kind of lower tier, kind of second pairing caliber defenseman, or a kind of higher tier bottom pairing player. So I think there is still hope for Soucy. Will he end up being a great player for this team? Probably not, but can he be a solid defenseman? I definitely think that's possible. So Soucy is someone who I definitely hope and I am expecting him to be, a good amount, a bit better than kind of what we saw last season there, which was, pretty bad at moments, of course. But like I said, he was definitely not the only player on this team that was not playing great throughout the 2024-25 season for the Rangers. But taking a look at Will Borgen now, this is someone who I think, I was kind of skeptical about the trade when it initially happened there, getting back a third and sixth and Will Borgen for, Capo Caco. And at the time, Borgen was also an expiring contract. He was kind of a rental. So I was pretty skeptical there. But once they made that extension, and we've seen, of course, kind of how Borgen played there and what kind of deals were handed out this past season or this offseason so far, with guys like Cody Ceci getting a $4.5 million cap hit, a guy like Will Borgen at a $4.1 million cap hit, to me doesn't sound too bad at all. So I really do think this contract is pretty fair, especially when you take a look at the deals that were handed out this free agency so far, of course, and just kind of how he played. I really think he is a solid defenseman, especially for that contract. So I think that was a good move there. He was definitely an upgrade over kind of what we've had at moments there this past season. And I just think adding in a guy like Borgen was a smart move. He's just a solid, good defenseman. He's not a great one, but just a solid, reliable defenseman for the most part there. And back when Carson Soucy and Will Borgen were both on the Seattle Kraken, they actually did play a decent amount together. So they have some chemistry previously. So maybe we do see them, once again play alongside each other. And now let's take a look at a couple different possible defense pairs for the New York Rangers. We'll take a look at kind of one of my kind of possible combinations I kind of came up with. And we'll also take a look at what Daily Faceoff has for their kind of projected defense pairs for the New York Rangers. So starting off with Daily Faceoffs, they've got on the top pair Vladislav Gavrikov alongside Adam Fox, which I have for mine as well. I think this is pretty much locked in place here and hopefully will be because, like I said, Foxy has never really had someone even close to as good as kind of Gavrikov play alongside him. So I think this could be kind of a match made in heaven, truly. Then for the second pair, they have Carson Soucy alongside Will Borgen. Like I kind of mentioned there, this is a possibility as they have a bit of chemistry previously from playing together when they were with the Kraken. And then on the third pair, you've got Urho Vakanainen and Braden Schneider. So that would mean they have a guy like Scott Morrow, the prospect that was picked up in the Keandre Miller trade, on the outside looking in, possibly as that number 7 defenseman. So I think that does, make some sense there. I mean, maybe they do want to go with more of the kind of veteran option there with an Urho Vakanainen, who, him in itself is not some super kind of veteran, experienced NHL defenseman, but, he obviously has a lot more of a sample size of games played at the NHL level compared to someone like a Scott Morrow. So that is an option there, of course. They may end up going with that, where they have a guy like Vakanainen in the lineup over Scott for day one, but I do think Scott being in the lineup there wouldn't be a bad idea. He is a very talented young defenseman with a pretty high upside, I think, so having him in the lineup there, if he does impress enough in training camp and in preseason, I think would be pretty beneficial for this team, possibly. And next up here, I've got a defense combination that we're going to take a look at, and it's not necessarily my favorite option, necessarily what I would do, but I think it is a possible option there, and one that does make some sense and is just kind of a little tweak to what Daily Faceoff had here. So I've got, instead of Urho Vakanainen on that third pair, I've got Braden Schneider alongside Scott Morrow. So the overall pair, I have Gavrikov Foxy, Soucy Borgen, just like daily faceoff had. And then on the third pair, though, instead of Vakanainen on that left side, I threw in Schneider to get Morrow on that right side. So I do think this is an option there. Braden Schneider is someone who has played on the left side in the past, with the Rangers this past season, but also in the past with the Brandon Wheat Kings, I believe, as well. So he has that experience, obviously not a ton of it, but I do think it is an option there for this team. They're kind of lacking on the left side, so having a guy like Braden Schneider kind of jump to the left there could really kind of balance out this team a little more there. On the right side, if you're keeping everyone on the right, you kind of have like Foxy, Borgen, Schneider, and Morrow. So I think if you throw in a guy like Schneider on the left side there, that opens up kind of the ability to have a guy like Scott Morrow in the actual opening night lineup, which, like I said, would not be a bad idea. And I wouldn't mind seeing Soucy alongside Borgen. I'm not saying that's my favorite kind of, pairing ever, because I don't necessarily love the idea of having Soucy in the top four to begin the season, but I do understand that could be a possible outcome there, and they have some chemistry previously, so I think maybe it wouldn't work out too bad in this new system with the whole new staff and all that kind of stuff and a full new offseason together. So maybe this would work out pretty well. Maybe it wouldn't, but I do think Schneider to be on the left side is a pretty good option there and a pretty good idea because, like I said, Soucy in that top four is not ideal. So you can obviously push up a guy like Schneider. And that's probably what I would do if I had to kind of come up with my own pairings right now. I would probably go with a guy like, Schneider in that top four on the left side over Soucy and possibly play him alongside Borgen there as a second pair and then have like a Soucy Morrow kind of combo there as a third pair. But obviously we'll have to wait and see what Mike Sullivan and his staff ended up deciding to do, but there are lots of combinations we could possibly see. But anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video. What are your overall kind of thoughts on this New York Rangers defense core and the kind of upgrades and moves they've made? Overall, do you think they've put this team in a better spot, a worse spot than last season? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And also, what are your thoughts on daily faceoff defense pairings, my defense pairings, and what would you want to see? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'll catch you next one. And also, of course, definitely don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next one. And let's go Rangers.